there's a magic to Oakland that I think that unless you've really spent a lot of time there, it's hard to understand or hard to communicate. And I remember they were just saying like, watch some videos from Bay Area rap artists and just how like extra they are and how colorful they are and how, you know, they have like really, really like bold camera choices. Directing to me felt like the one career path that would allow me to keep all these interests alive in different ways and not necessarily have to fully move away from them. And I think Blindspotting was just perfect because it really allowed me to think in those terms when it came to filmmaking. Like, how can you include music? How can you include sort of like more theatrical techniques? Spoken word was a world also that I stumbled upon, and you know, now I feel like deeply ingrained in, and so many of the people that I work with and collaborate with come from that world, and you know, it forced me to think very openly and honestly in a very vulnerable way about the kind of art that I'm doing, because that's what David and Rafa do, and that's what spoken word poets do. Just this particular sort of like generation of poets that is very concerned about sort of like, you know, truth and socially oriented art. I think Blindspotting opened the door for me to say there is a way to merge these universes and hopefully in ways that don't feel forced or unnatural. So it's really, I think it just sort of like set the tone for the kind of projects that I wanted to do, and you know, not to say that I want to do the same thing over and over again, but it set the bar for me in terms of like the things that I'm looking at, I think should challenge me in the same way and should allow me to bring in worlds that potentially don't normally exist together as effortlessly. The day that David left Hamilton, these producers who had been working with him on developing Blindspotting just told him, like, we can do it, we have an opening, we can fund it, we can finance it, and if we shoot it this coming summer. And because I had been working with him so much on all this other extracurricular stuff, I think it just became easy for him to say, I have a director who understands how to adapt sort of like theater performance and spoken word and sort of like incorporate rap elements, musical elements into narrative work. And they showed them the bars tapes, and I guess it was one of those things where like a few weeks later I was back in LA and we were doing pre-production for Blindspotting. I think that just having the blessing of both David and Rafa was sort of like the biggest just point for me. Then they asked me if I had done any narrative work, and I sent them Identity Theft. They had already seen the clipping video, so I think they were aware of the stuff that we had been doing. We got together to talk a little about the story and a little bit about, like, you know, if this were to become a film, what are your big takeaways and how would you begin to envision it? And I think it was Rafa, myself, and the two producers. We just had a really good conversation that I guess must have left them feeling comfortable because we were over here. It was even less than 2 weeks after that. It was like one of those calls where it's like, what are you doing Monday? Could you potentially just get on a plane and start pre-production? I must have seen Do the Right Thing maybe 45 times. And that's not even a joke. I think I can probably tell you every shot of every line of that movie from memory, just because that was the first reference that came up when we were talking about it, just in a way that it captures the neighborhood with lots of vibrancy and lots of color, and the way that Spike just was so fearless about some of the stylistic choices behind it, and the performances are just so wonderful. So anyway, that was the first reference that came up. We saw Friday, we saw The Shining, because the script has all these like very complex psychological sequences that required some like quasi-horror treatment to it. So we saw The Shining, and I do think that watching the movie back, we were able to capture something that was only there because we were all so eager and so just like excited to have a chance at making a feature. Blindspotting premiered at Sundance 2018. A person from development at Disney was at the premiere screening, and it coincidentally happened. Disney Animation was going through big sort of like management restructuring change. John Lasseter had just left, and Jennifer Lee had just joined as Chief Creative Officer. And one of her very first things that she wanted to do was to diversify her directing department, bring in younger voices, bring in people from live action and from independent filmmaking, because every director at Disney Animation for almost 100 years had been brought up through the system there. So it was either a storyboard artist or a writer or an animator who would get promoted and would start directing. And there's a reason why that system exists, but it offered very little room for change. So she decided to hire people from outside. All of a sudden, I felt like I was in this film school, art school, hybrid environment where I was just surrounded by incredible artists, incredible craftspeople who were just like putting so much thought and effort into the construction of a story. And I've honestly been learning so much there. I think that I'm still doing live action projects on the side and very much like hoping to keep that side of me alive while I'm at Disney, but I'm really glad I did it, and I think it's been allowing me to sort of like continue learning in a way that I think was important for me. I went to this spoken word poetry workshop that this nonprofit from here from LA did. They're called Get Lit. And it was these 20 or so young poets from all around LA just doing a 3-minute piece about themselves, their communities, their place in the city. And I was just so moved. And it was like that raw energy that I felt when I first met David and Rafa, when I first heard their work in music and poetry and theater, that it just felt like a young artist who had so much to say, and we're still trying to find sort of like tools to figure out how to say it. So I came up with this idea that we would develop a movie together, and more than like a traditional movie, it was more like a workshop. Essentially, the pitch to them was this show that I just saw, where you each performed a piece, and they were like seemingly had nothing to do with each other, but yet they felt like this like beautiful sort of like showcase of life in LA through different lenses and different neighborhoods. Is there a way that we can adapt that for the screen, but rather than sort of like going through the normal screenwriting process, like just letting them, because they're all young writers, so letting them handle all of that, and it would be developed by, written by, and starring all of them.